Welcome. It is so good to have you all with us tonight for this lecture on the place of religion in a changing workplace. My name is AJ Poularis and I'm the director of the Center for Faith and Learning at Anselm House. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this lecture. So a little bit about Anselm House, if you are not familiar with us. We have been present at the campus of the University of Minnesota since 1982, under various names, but the latest incarnation, so to say, latest iteration has been Anselm House. And our mission is to connect the Christian faith with all areas of learning in the university, whether that's business or agriculture or education or healthcare or law or engineering, whatever it is. We try to bring the Christian faith and the rich resource of the Christian faith to bear upon all those different disciplines. And we derive our inspiration from St. Anselm, our namesake. St. Anselm had this well-known concept of faith-seeking understanding, fides quaerens intellectum in Latin. And it underscores our belief in the interconnectedness of our faith and our knowledge of the world. In fact, we aim to model our presence in a university also on St. Anselm's thoughtful faithfulness and his engagement with learning. And we do this because we truly believe and humbly contend that when we properly align faith and learning, and faith and reason, and faith and knowledge, the result is an approach to God, to our neighbors, to ourselves, to this reality, and to all our learning that yields truth and goodness and beauty. Within the broader Anselm House mission of connecting faith and knowledge with all of life, the particular focus of the Center for Faith and Learning is to support the academic community at the University of Minnesota in asking the big questions of ultimate meaning and purpose and how that connects to all the different disciplines. And so the center therefore functions as a convener of important discussions, both disciplinary and interdisciplinary, among faculty, academic staff, and graduate students here at the University of Minnesota. And so the lecture tonight is in the context of our emerging efforts to foster deep and meaningful conversations in the area of business. And so that's why we are here, and that's why we're not on the East Bank, because this is where the Carlson School is as well. And we've been working with students and faculty and the wider area of like Minnesota and especially Twin Cities business leaders to think deeply about what does it actually mean to be a faithful presence in the world of business. And over the next few years, we hope to grow a vibrant community of Carlson students, faculty and staff, and local business leaders to think deeply about the place of faith in the context of business and entrepreneurship. And if you want to be involved in that, just ask me or anyone else on the Anselm House staff after the lecture. We'd love to tell you more and how you could be involved in that kind of emerging kind of work in the area of faith and business. And we want you to be involved. It's not just an invitation. We actually need people who work in the area of who are in the business world. We need them to be involved, to kind of be a reality check for us kind of academics as well. So this evening we'll continue a conversation that is relevant for almost all of us. What is the place of faith at our work? With an increasingly diverse religious landscape and a share of employees feeling more comfortable expressing their faith in the workplace, the potential for workplace conflicts, discrimination complaints, and legal disputes also increases. And yet research shows over and over again that openness to religion in the workplace can also reduce stress, help employees cope with problems, and increase productivity. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Elaine Howard Ecklund. Dr. Ecklund is the Herbert Autry Chair in Social Sciences, Professor of Sociology, and Director of the Bonyuk Institute for Religious Tolerance at Rice University. And she has become renowned for large-scale sociological research in religion as it interfaces with other disciplines. A few years ago, she undertook a large-scale study of scientists, and it resulted in this book, Why Science and Faith Need Each Other. And she studied what scientists actually do think and practice when it comes to religion. And based on kind of mountains of data, she argues that science and faith are not opposite of each other, contrary to kind of popular belief and what you hear in the media and what a lot of people also kind of like feel sometimes. But that based on this research, C says that there's actually a lot of convergence between the values of Christians and the values of scientists. And we should actually seek this convergence and use that convergence to kind of like deal with really big questions. And so C singles out curiosity, doubt, humility, creativity, healing, awe, shalom, and gratitude that both scientists and Christians share, and that can actually help us to navigate really difficult discussions, especially those that arrive with conflict about, for example, the origin of the universe, evolution, climate change, genetic technologies. So great book based on lots and lots of data, lots and lots of research. She did it again. And this time, not in the area of science, but this time in the area of faith in the workplace. And this book, Religion in a Changing Workplace, right there, on, that's the cover, is research based on 15,000 kind of surveys and research among 15,000 people and over 300 or so, something like that. Interviews that she and her co-collaborators, co-PIs, did. And so they interviewed people to get a better understanding based in reality and not on rumors or our own ideas or assumptions on what really is going on in the workplace and how workers think about their jobs. And so it should be a fascinating journey into religion in the workplace, kind of the neglected dimension of diversity as well. If you talk about DEI things, religion is kind of the neglected dimension of diversity. So tonight, she will dive into this book, which is kind of the academic treatment, and this book, which is more the popular version. And so you get a treat. This is the research presented in both of these books is amazing, super helpful for us to navigate workplace issues. And so she's going to tell us and share with us what she found and what we can learn from her research. And so we hope that you feel very welcome tonight and know that whatever perspective or background you bring to tonight's topic, we are delighted that you're here and to have you being part of this conversation. And after the lecture this evening, we'll have a Q&A, and so there's a microphone right there, so you can come up to the microphone for Q&A. But after that, we invite you to stay for a reception where you can actually continue this conversation, and it's going to be right out there in the hallway. If you're interested in more of Ansem House, we have a table there as well, so please visit our table in the back for more information, and maybe to sign up for an open house or for any of the other things that we're doing. And then also, just a quick reminder, all of you, when you came in, you got an evaluation card. We would love for you to fill out this evaluation card so we know what you think about these lectures and so we can actually improve our lectures as well. That's enough for me. I would like to invite Elaine to come up here for a lecture of Religion in a Changing Workplace. And I invite you to give her a very warm Minnesota welcome for someone from Texas. I'll take these.
Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and it's fantastic to be here. My husband's parents were raised in Minnesota, in Minneapolis and Wilmer, Minnesota, if any of you know of that little town. So I am going to talk to you tonight about responding to religion in a changing workplace. And this is a topic which is quite personal to me as well, in part because about 3 years ago now, I took over an institute at Rice University, which is called the Boniek Institute for the Study and Advancement of Religious Tolerance. And one of the first things that I did is said to our university president and provost, you know, I don't come from a religious minority tradition. I'm not part of a tradition that is in the minority in the United States. I'm part of the Christian tradition. You know, will this be a problem? You know, are you looking for something different, someone who has more exposure to people who maybe have faced a real religious discrimination? Not to say that Christians don't sometimes face discrimination too, but you know what I mean. I was kind of like, am I really the right fit for this? And our president said, you know, we totally pick you. We just want someone who's a good researcher and someone who can help others cultivate different kinds of perspectives, someone who can make a hospitable place from people from different religious traditions or no religious tradition. And so that was the first time for me, and I've been in the academy many years now, where I really felt like, gosh, is my religious tradition a good fit for this job? And I started to get a little bit of sense of what I think many people are facing all the time. Do they belong religiously in their particular workplace? And there are all different kinds of workplaces. I'm sure you all represent, see, I say y'all because I've now taken that in as a Texan, but I'm actually from New York, by the way. So that's been a long time coming. My Texan friends will be very proud. So I want to talk to you tonight about 5 kinds of things. So I want to try to argue that workplaces actually provide opportunities for religious pluralism, and they are maybe one of the last kind of organizations in our society that does provide that kind of opportunity for pluralism. In my own case, I'm a scholar of religion, a sociologist of religion, but I didn't really get a lot of chance, of course, to interact with people from other religious traditions in my church, right? That's going to be a mono-religious organization. I didn't really get a chance to become deep friends with people from lots of different religious traditions in my neighborhood. But doing this kind of work that I've done on my university campus and the kind of opportunities that I've had to really engage with folks from all kinds of traditions outside my own has been a really extraordinary gift and an extraordinary experience. And that happened in my workplace. Second, I'm going to argue that people actually want to express their faith at work, and maybe a little bit differently than we assume. Third, that people who feel called to their work see themselves, and their bosses see them, as better workers under certain conditions. Fourth, that we have religious discrimination in many American workplaces, and that we really need to pay attention to what religious discrimination is, to combating religious discrimination in workplaces in the same kinds of ways that we pay attention to other forms of discrimination. And I want to get really practical with you. I know some in the audience are part of the academic workplace. Some are part of other types of workplaces outside the academy. A special welcome to you tonight for those who are outside the academy. And I want us all to think a little bit very practically about the kinds of practices and even policies that we need to have to catch up to some of the current realities of really multi-religious workplaces. So here's the data. I'm kind of a data junkie, so I'm going to go over this kind of fast, but if you have questions, and more concerted questions, I really encourage you to think of those. So my colleagues and I, Denise Daniels and Christopher Scheidel, did about 5 years of data collection for this study, for this book, Religion and Changing Workplace. We did a nationally representative surveys of over 15,000 people, actually closer to 16,000. We surveyed people a little bit before the pandemic started, and then we actually surveyed them again after the pandemic to try to start thinking about how the pandemic times may have changed how we think about faith at work. We also did in-depth interviews with those who were working in paid work or looking for work. We also did in-depth interviews with oversamples, so we took more people into our population in proportion than are actually represented in the U.S. as a whole, because we wanted to hear, especially from the voices of those who are part of minority traditions in the U.S., from Muslims and Jewish individuals, and from non-religious people as well, who are a very important part of this conversation. We also did in-depth interviews with religious leaders because we wanted to hear the kinds of things that people want in their congregations and how religious leaders feel equipped or don't feel equipped to deal with issues of faith in the workplace. And we also, because there's a large proportion of Spanish speakers in the U.S., we did survey and interviews in both Spanish and English. So let's talk a little bit about religious polarization and pluralism. So here is a very interesting a figure, which I hope you can see some of those. I'll just explain it to you for a minute. So this is the proportion of people who say, at work, I display or wear items that represent my faith or spirituality. So you see the kind of big ticket workplace category. So 71% of people who work in the field of religion, so that would be like a pastor or an imam or other ministry worker, say that they at work they display or wear items that represent their faith or spirituality. 28%, I have to just tell you a little thing. I gave this material to a group of pastors at one point, and one of them raised their hand, and he was like, what about the other 29%? Like, why are they not displaying items that represent their faith? Like, what are they doing in religious work? They were very judgy. It was very interesting. So, and about 28% of those in caretaking, so social service kinds of work, wear or display items that represent their faith or spirituality. But if you go down to the lower side, that in the legal profession, so in the law, it goes down to 16%. And in life and physical and social sciences, quite a large number of those are those who work in universities, it goes down to 13%. So there's real variation among occupations in the extent to which people feel comfortable expressing their faith at work. This is the proportion of folks who say that they're denied employment due to their religious or non-religious identity. 18% of Muslims say that they feel that they've been denied employment. 6% of Buddhists, 6% of people who are Jewish, and 3% of Christians. We also found in our data lots of examples of healthy religious pluralism, which I think we can really learn from. So here's a quote from a woman we interviewed who works in the pharmaceutical industry in the Midwest, actually, and she's a Muslim, and she says, she has mainly Christian colleagues, she told me. She said, I've taught my Christian colleagues the things that I do in my religion of Islam, and they have taught me a lot too. And we really pressed her because she was really a minority in her organization and also really in her region of the country. And she said she felt incredibly welcome in her particular place of employment because there was a sense of curiosity, but it really didn't go just one way. It wasn't as if her Christian colleagues expected her to be curious about their religion but weren't curious about hers. They actually did studies together at lunchtime that did not have any evangelistic content. We're just asking each other questions about their religious tradition, and she felt incredibly welcome. So there are lots of examples like that. So now I want to talk a bit about how people want to express their faith at work. So they want to do that in 4 kinds of ways. Firstly, people do want to have the possibility of wearing or displaying religious items in their workplaces. So that's one way. They do want to, under certain conditions, have the possibility of talking with others about their faith, although this doesn't happen as much as many employers fear that it might. So when we talk about expressing faith in the workplace and we interview employers, they mostly think people are wanting to talk about their faith in ways that might be offensive to others. And there's a lot of fear about that. We talk about that quite a bit in the book. We have a chapter on fear and what people are afraid of in terms of bringing faith to the workplace. Employees want to take time off of work to observe religious holidays, and they want to engage in private practices like prayer or meditation and other religious practices during work hours in a way that they say is encouraging and brings a sense of meaning to their work and also alleviates stress under many conditions. We found that individuals who display or wear items at work that represent their faith or spirituality are more likely to say that they are satisfied with their job. And we also found, not that this is the only reason to allow it, but that individuals who say that they feel comfortable talking about their faith at work are more likely to say that they feel a strong sense of commitment to the organization they work for. And we did all kinds of different analyses with those variables, and really all of the indices of expressing faith at work, whether it's talking about faith, allowing people to take time off for holidays, and other kinds of things I just mentioned, the more of those that people are allowed to do, the more commitment they have to their work organization. And we find that that's true also of other pieces of bringing their whole selves to work. So people say if they're able to talk more about their families at work, if they're able to talk about the hobbies that they enjoy at work, that they feel a stronger sense of commitment to the work organizations. But religion for religious people is a big part of that. About 22%, so this just gives you the proportions of folks who are doing what kind of practices, about 22% of U.S. workers said they're motivated to talk about their faith or spirituality with people at work. This goes up to 52% for evangelical Protestant workers, perhaps not surprisingly, who say that they're motivated to talk about their faith with people at work, a much higher proportion than any other religious tradition. Interestingly, 36% of black workers compared to 26% of white workers say that they feel motivated to talk to others about their faith while at work. Even though this happens, there is often a sense of fear that there will be judgment or conflict when people do express their faith at work. And that's often why those people who do not feel that they can express their faith at work don't feel that they can, is because they fear that others will judge them. Employers fear that allowing people to express their faith at work will lead to unnecessary conflict in the workplace and could become a real problem. So here's a man who works in tech support who says, I don't really speak about religion because I'm not trying to offend someone. I know now in the world, if you say something about some religion, it's a very sensitive topic in public. So I'd rather choose not to say anything about it. So that sense of fear. There's also people who feel that they must keep their faith and their work completely separate. And this is an intriguing example to us because this person's actually bivocational, works as a pastor, but also works as a truck driver to make money for his work as a pastor. And he says, he really separates these things. He says the purpose of the workplace is to make money. The church is the place to worship and express your faith. So very unexpectedly, this pastor thinks that these things should be kept very separate. I also want to transition now to talking a little bit about calling and the extent to which calling is related to how we think about our work and the kind of satisfaction we have in our work. So about 1/5 of workers identify their work as a spiritual calling. We found that more women report a sense of calling to work than men by nearly 2 to 1. There is also a sense of calling that declines with increasing income. So if you make more money in your workplace, you're less likely to feel called to your work. We spent a lot of time talking about that and why that might be the case. But we found another kind of thing, which was that evangelical Protestants report a sense of calling more than mainline Protestants and Catholics. That was very interesting to us. And then we wanted to drill down in our interviews and really find out what people meant by calling and how they thought about it. And if it's something perhaps that workplaces should try to cultivate in people, and how would we do that? And what do people want from their churches, for example, or their other religious organizations when it comes to thinking about calling? So we ended up analyzing our interviews and creating a kind of matrix for how our respondents thought about calling. So in one side of our matrix is the location of service. So is your work a spiritual calling, and do you serve primarily those who are proximate to your workplace? So those who are inside the workplace, is that the primary place that you sense that you're serving others through your work? Or are you doing work that really your calling is to those who are outside of your workplace? Your location of service is outside of the workplace. So here's one explanation of this. So this is a respondent who said that the work itself was a blessing from God, so very much served inside the workplace. He says, so for many decades, I believe that one of my purposes on the earth is just to help people. God's given me a gift to teach and to train. And so obviously this is the job, where in the job title is trainer. So being at this job, it allows me to do what I do well, which is to train and to educate. And so here is another kind of axis that we think about, whether we think about our work being primarily providing the kind of calling and meaning and purpose itself, Or does the work provide you the capacity to have your primary meaning and purpose outside the workplace? So you might think of people who think their work provides money to, say, take care of their family, or it might provide resources to give to something that they're very passionate about outside of their family. So here's a man who is a manager, who's an evangelical Christian, and this is very much, he thinks that his work is serving the broader world, and he's very excited about that. He says the fact that it's Subway, it's vegetables and food and stuff that people can conceivably be nourished by, and located in some of the toughest regions in the world, and that they feed a lot of people every day. And I definitely did consider that, and definitely consider, does that line up, does that track with what I'm called upon to do by the Gospels? And he's decided that it does. And this was just a wonderful interview for us, just extremely encouraging at a personal level, too, when I interviewed this man. And he said that he feels so good about providing an alternative nutritionally to what most people find in fast food. And he didn't talk very much about like the way he put together the sandwiches, or he didn't talk about making friends with people at work and serving them. So really he's doing this work, you know, people buy the sandwiches, they're taking them, he's really serving the world. He's very proud of being part of the company. I feel like I'm doing an advertisement for Subway. I'm not meaning to do that. I do eat at Subway occasionally when I'm traveling, but that's not the purpose here. But it was more that he really is serving the broader world through these sandwiches that he makes, and he feels extremely good about that. Now I want to talk about a sort of dark side of calling. So we've written some about this too. Viewing work indeed as a spiritual calling is often associated with greater job satisfaction, and a sense of calling reduces the negative impact of perceived discrimination on job satisfaction. So when people feel called to their work, they tend to underplay discrimination that's experienced at work. This happens especially for women and people of color. They tend to underplay gender discrimination and racial discrimination because they feel called. And as we got deeper into these interviews, we felt like people often said to us things like, well, I just feel so lucky. I feel so fortunate that I'm called to my work, that I enjoy my work. I find so much meaning in my work. So I really shouldn't complain about the fact that occasionally I'm discriminated against at work. Another thing is that when people feel called to their work, that can often blind them to the difficulties others experience work. So we had questions on our surveys about things like, you know, people should just turn the other way when they experience discrimination, or people shouldn't complain about their jobs, or you know, these kind of questions on our surveys. And we found that not only did feeling be called at work lead people to underplay their own discrimination, it also led them to underplay others' discrimination as well. And so I think that's an important dynamic, is that calling can be a very, very positive thing in people's lives, and maybe something that ought to be cultivated. But then under certain conditions, feeling called to work can mean that you are maybe more likely to allow yourself to be taken advantage of at work in certain kinds of ways. And we found other ways that this happened too, especially in the so-called helping professions. People felt called to their work, didn't feel like they could complain because they had to work extra long hours because the work was very meaningful. So you should just accept, you know, the kind of difficulties that come along with it. We wanted to talk also about discrimination, religious discrimination, and accommodation. And there's surprisingly not been a lot written about religious discrimination in workplaces. So ours is among the first of the studies to really address this very intentionally. So we found that 31% of our survey respondents reported at least some unfair treatment due to their religion or non-religion at work. Here's a woman who converted to Islam, and she says, my boss, she got up and talked a lot about being Muslim now, and it was all negative. It's actually shocking to me to listen to this interview that this kind of thing could happen in a workplace. But just told story after story about sort of being called out for not being American enough, not being the right religion. And this woman felt incredibly torn and needed the work for her family, but just didn't feel like she could quit, and ended up quitting in the end because she felt so discriminated against and felt like she had no recourse. So here's the proportion who reported some experience with religious discrimination at work. So 65% of Muslims reported some experience with religious discrimination at work. 55% of people who are Jewish. In the last year or so, the proportion of Jewish people who feel that they've experienced some discrimination at work has actually risen, and now it's almost the same proportion as Muslims. But Christians often feel this way as well. So we found that 38% of those who think of themselves as evangelical Protestant Christians report some experience with religious discrimination at work. And sadly, many of those folks are also reporting gender or racial discrimination at work. So sometimes those things feel like they overlap for people. We found that 31% of Buddhists, 41% of Hindus, and 33% of those who experience have no religion say that they feel like they experience some discrimination because of their non-religion. So they're more likely to say, here's the folks who are most likely to say that they've experienced religious discrimination at work. Those who are more religious, those who are more religiously expressive. Younger workers are more attuned and say that they're more likely to experience religious discrimination at work. More educated workers say that they're more likely to experience religious discrimination at work, and Jewish and Muslim workers, I just said. And again, there's sort of like a two-sidedness here to this. Women and non-white workers are less likely to say that they've experienced religious discrimination, but also have a sense that they're not sure when it's religious discrimination or gender discrimination or racial discrimination. So religious discrimination does overlap, as I've said, with other forms of discrimination. 16% say that they conceal their religious beliefs at work for fear of others' perceptions. Here's a Muslim man, who said, if I wear my religion as a badge on my shoulder, it will rub somebody the wrong way. So why do that? And here's a woman who's Jewish who said, they've always told me you're free to practice your religion, but because I don't see other people doing it, practicing their religion, I don't feel comfortable. And the times that I did have to pray, I actually walked outside into a closed corner in the hallway to do it, because the person went on to say that they didn't feel like they could ask their boss if there was a place to pray. So you find a kind of difficult cycle here. Everyone has a desire to belong in their workplace and to feel like they're representing their full selves at work. They then feel like they need to conceal their religious tradition often because they have some fear that they might be discriminated against. It might make other people uncomfortable. And so then they feel like they don't belong, then they continue to conceal, and it just keeps going around. Here's an Indian woman who's an optometry technician who says this, and this was a positive experience, where her boss said, if you ever do prayers or anything, feel free to go to the third room, which is like a recreational space. It can be your space. You can leave your prayer mat in there. She said this made her feel like her workplace is very, very accommodating. As she explained, I never felt like I couldn't communicate that with them about my religion or what I need. We also ask people if they know the kinds of accommodations, the religious accommodations that the organization they work for offers, and we found that 31% of them know what kinds of religious accommodations the organization they work for offers. Here's an evangelical Christian who says that she's just not really sure. She says, I wanted to do either a Bible study or a prayer group during the lunch times, but I wasn't sure, the policy for that. If the policies were more well known, I probably would have maybe felt more comfortable, but she was sort of a little bit too afraid to ask and didn't really know. So I think for those of you who are in workplaces, especially for those who lead workplaces, there are some big takeaways that we can think about from these data. So I do think we need to focus on those from minority religious traditions who are most likely to experience discrimination. There are increasing numbers of workers who are Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and other minority traditions, and they have particular concerns about whether they really have equal opportunities in workplaces. And there is going to be quite big differences among industries and among regions of the country. So we found that, in Houston, Texas, where I am, when we looked at these things regionally, there were many more Christians in workplaces. The energy industry, which is very big in my region of the country, oil and gas in particular, is lots of Christian workers. And so people who are non-religious in those industries are more likely to feel discriminated against. There's also large numbers of minority traditions in those industries. But if you're, say, in the Bay Area, and work in the tech industry, you're going to find the majority of folks are not religious, or again, are from minority religious traditions. And in those industries, Christians sometimes felt very much discriminated against and were part of the minority in those traditions. So I think it pays to think about, as a leader, where are you in the terms of the region of the country? What is your industry? Is your industry likely to be diverse in a particular kind of way, which you can then respond to, and making sure that people know that there are fair accommodations in your workplace. I do think as well that our research shows the value of focusing on the minorities in the minority traditions. Black and Hispanic workers across the country are more likely to be Christians. These are the two racial groups in the US that are the most Christian. They are also particularly likely in these two groups to want to talk about their faith at work. And they also have difficulty figuring out where discrimination is coming from, because they're susceptible to be experiencing both racial and religious discrimination. And if they feel called to their work, as I said before, they're likely, and they're quite likely to feel called to their work, they're likely to underplay discrimination. So it's a complex kind of environment that leaders need to think about. And as I said, there are big regional and industry differences. There's also a place in workplaces, but in particular in religious organizations, to think about what it means to feel called to one's work and the various ways that one can feel called to their work. Those who feel called are more likely to be satisfied with their work. And so there might be ways in which leaders could offer opportunities for people to explore feeling called to their work. But there are also potential downsides to their work. Leaders to feeling called to work. Leaders can actually take advantage of people who feel called to their work a little bit more easily. And that's something that we ought to think about and attend to. DEI efforts are extremely fraught right now in our country. But still, even if we do away with DEI efforts altogether, religious plurality is a reality in American workplaces. And so there need to be ways in which we think about a religion intelligently alongside other kinds of diversity in workplaces. And there's lots of data which show, I didn't get a chance to present it here tonight, but there's lots of data which show that more diverse workplaces are often able to come up with more complicated solutions to the most intractable problems that our society faces. So it's the right thing to do to think about how to accommodate people, but it also affects the bottom line in other ways as well. So to thinking about accommodation and the kind of possibilities there. So I think as leaders, we need to examine our accommodation policies. We need to be a bit more proactive in telling those who work with us and for us about those accommodation policies, and really making sure that workplaces understand workers and workplaces understand those policies. And I think we need to just rethink our approach to faith in the workplace. People really want to bring their whole selves to work. I do not think, based on these data and other data, that subverting religion is the answer. And really, in our society, workplaces may be one of the remaining places where we can have opportunities to practice a kind of healthy religious pluralism. So I think I'll end there, and I guess I'll welcome your questions. Thank you so much. And please read my book, right? That's what we're supposed to say. So, and if you do read it, or even if you don't, go ahead and rate it on your favorite platform where you rate books. So excited to have all of you here tonight. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Elaine. It was a pleasure, and it's so interesting to see all the data that you've gathered. And there's so much in there. Even the statement that you made about, like, the workplaces might be the last place where religious pluralism is really kind of flourishing, and where we can actually practice these kind of things. That's, I think, very interesting. So I want to open up the floor. If you have a question for Elaine, please come down here, use this microphone so we can capture your question as well. And then somehow we talk about virtues quite a bit. And so I just want to give 3 guidelines for the questions themselves. And there are 3 C's. I don't know where Andrew is. He's probably laughing now. The first one is be curious. It's always good to have a posture of openness. And if you have a question, it should be a question and not just a statement. So there's a question, always something that you can learn from. So the curiosity is actually a very good kind of habit that you can display tonight. Be charitable. Charitable to one another, charitable to Elaine. Give the benefit of the doubt and assume that we can learn something, even if we disagree with things. And be concise. I know sometimes that's really hard, but I'd encourage you to be concise so that we can actually ask as many questions on this super interesting topic. So with that, I want to open the floor. Be welcome to come down here, ask your question, and to continue the conversation right now. Could you please come down here so we can capture the question as well?
I think they need it for the mic. Thank you for that.
My question is, who are workers? Are they human flash batteries? Just be like robots. Please not take my photo. Yeah, just be like robots completing the tasks. And I do have a curiosity in belonging or curiosity, because like a flash battery or battery, that's what I learned. What's the workers mean? And there's like a financial metrics or indicators like a ROI, ROE, or like an EBITDA or PE ratio, whatever, just showing kind of like if they got a calling or they got a belonging, if improving this kind of a capital return or financial metrics. I think if you may include that part to your research, I think it will be extremely helpful. Why? Because all the hedge funds or asset management company on Wall Street, they're all looking for this kind of a metrics, right? And the executive, the leadership of the company need to gain the favor from the institutional investors.
Yeah, so let me, there's a lot that you said. So 2 kinds of responses. I do think people in modern workplaces often feel like automatons, right? That they are not valued for who they are. And especially with many people being drawn out of the physical workplace back to home, there were some pandemic principles that really changed how we view our work. And people that we interviewed post-pandemic when compared to pre-pandemic felt like they'd had time to really reconsider the place of their work in respect to other pieces of their lives and didn't want to feel like automatons anymore. There's obviously huge differences among industries, which I don't have time to go into here. So I think that's important. So there are often multiple reasons for doing things, and there is a sense among workers that just this little bit of data that we're showing that people feel more committed to their workplace. They feel more invested when they're allowed to bring their religion to work. So that's a sort of bottom line principle, but there are civic principles as well that are very important in thinking about how we can model for one another dialogue and relationship in a diverse society. And there are personal reasons in that individuals feel like they can flourish more, they have a deeper sense of meaning, they enjoy their work more when they feel like they can bring more of themselves, including their religion. So for those 3 kinds of reasoning categories, I'm more friendly to the latter 2, but there are ways in which certainly bringing one's religious tradition or allowing workers to bring their traditions to the workplace will, I think, influence that kind of commitment to their organization. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and sharing with us.
Yeah.
Many times we hear, you're supposed to work 9 to 5, and then after that, then you can share what you think about sports, politics, spirituality. You can work as you want to, but did that come out in any of the interviews?
Very much so. So there is a sense where the majority of the population has a kind of separatist attitude and feels what's interesting about our data is that we also uncovered that people don't feel satisfied with that. So they do have a sense that their workplace is and their jobs are compartmentalized, but they don't want them to be. That people seem to have a propensity towards being whole people and being the same kind of person at work as they are, in other spheres of their lives, that kind of whole self model. And that then applies to people's religious traditions as well. And just to their relationships. So we found that people who talk about the religious traditions also talk about other pieces of their lives, like you're saying, like their families and their hobbies and just their likes and dislikes. And when workers get to know one another and form deeper relationships in their jobs, they often do better work, feel more satisfied, feel less tired. So we asked all kinds of questions about, how tired you feel, we had a series of questions about time starvation. So do people feel like they never have enough time to get done what they need to at work? So people who were, felt like they could bring their whole selves to work, felt like more balanced in a general kind of way, less time starved as well. So I didn't, again, have time to present all of that, but it's in the book if you want to read about it.
Can I move this just a little over here? Thank you so much for coming this far north.
Yeah. Oh.
As the seasons are changing.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I miss the seasons.
Well, I'm from St. Cloud, not far from where your husband grew up. But as I have worked with grad students and faculty, they do reflect a lot of that. I appreciate that you encourage people to figure out ways to be whole people in ways that make sense for their workplace. As you talked about discrimination, a lot of the quotes used words of "I feel" or "I don't feel." I'm wondering, in your research, were they responding to a definition of discrimination, so that they were responding to something external rather than something internal, I guess?
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So we did have more of a definition in our quantitative work, something along the lines of othering that has an impact on life chances, which we took a definition that's used widely in social science literature. When our interviews and our focus groups had a very different kind of valence, where we really wanted people to give their own definitions, to talk about how they felt, which may, there you are. You ran up very quickly back to your seat. That's very impressive. So that there was a sense where we wanted them to give their own definitions and to think through with them those kind of things. And we had 3 forms of data collection. I didn't talk so much about this, but we did focus groups in addition to doing interviews and 2 types of surveys with people.
First of all, thank you. I am a student at Carlson, and
great.
so in between classes today, I had the opportunity to rifle through some of the pages of your book.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
I really enjoyed your emphasis on Imago Dei theology as a support for religious pluralism. I've had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of different Christian traditions on campus, and some would place a heavier emphasis on the Great Commission, with practicing faith in the workplace, the end of that being conversion. And I'm curious, what is your response to somebody who places a greater emphasis on the Great Commission with an end towards conversion versus Imago Dei with an end towards religious pluralism?
Oh, that's a great question. So you're talking about this This book, which if you just want to be a total nerd about this kind of stuff, we're doing another talk tomorrow about this book, that you were talking about, called Working for Better, A New Approach to Faith at Work, which is written for a public Christian audience, because Christians right now in our society are the ones who are really struggling the most with how to integrate faith and work and how to think about, as Christians, religious pluralism. So the book I talked about tonight is this book, which is very much about all religious traditions and those who have no religious tradition, and how we think about diverse religious workplaces, religious diversity in workplaces, rather. So two kinds of responses to your question, which was a very good one. There is a lot of fear on the part of workplace leaders that if they allow people to express religion in their workplaces, that there will be like massive evangelization happening all the time, and that there will be incredible conflict and people won't be able to get their work done because they're talking about Jesus so much. So and I'm kind of saying that tongue in cheek, because our data, and it depends on whether you view the glass half empty or half full, our data showed that no one wants to be doing that. So probably the evangelical pastor in the midst is perhaps disappointed that people are not better at sharing their faith, but there's just not evidence that that's what people want to do in the workplace. Even people who see themselves as very much a part of this Christian idea of the Great Commission, which is the sense that it's very much a part of the Christian faith to go and convince others of the Christian faith, right? And this may have very positive implications, but it is not what is the workers on the whole are wanting to do, even those who consider themselves part of that tradition. So that's very interesting. And we can talk more about the implications of that. So we're in our second book for a Christian audience. We talk a lot about the Imago Dei, this idea that every person is made in the image of God. And we use that theological idea as a kind of touchstone for a Christian approach to religious pluralism, which is that because Christians are made in the image of God, but so are Muslims, and so are non-religious people. And the idea that when you meet someone else who's created in the image of God, you may disagree very much with their faith perspective, but because they're made in the image of God, you need to have a kind of humility towards the person and saying, this God image bearer is someone who I could learn something from. I could learn something about God. There's always the possibility of me experiencing more of God from the other person who's also made in the image of God. And we found that as we've shopped this material around to different kinds of Christian communities, that that's actually a very powerful motivator for what I would think of as a Christian myself and as a scholar myself as a very healthy religious pluralism where everyone is walking around thinking they can learn from the other. So there is a kind of genuine interaction, which I think leads to a kind of healthy pluralism where you keep your hand around what you believe, and you're not necessarily ready to let go of that belief, to open your hand completely, but with your other hand, you're reaching out to the other with an open hand and saying, I have the possibility of really learning from you in a way that I can take back and really change who I am. And there's not a kind of fear associated with that. And so we found that that's been a very helpful, and it's really resonated with people.
Thank you. I think it's very healthy approach.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Esther Dale, and I am employed at the University of Minnesota.
Oh, fantastic.
And I am just fascinated by your work. I think you have a dream job for
I think that too. And
Yes.
after doing this study, you come to this kind of work as very much a researcher. I know that's not your question. I'm just
please go ahead.
vibing with you now.
No.
But you come to this work and it's just a research study. But because we're people as scholars, social science, where people studying other people, you get a very much personal change possibilities as well. And I would say that the chief one for me was just an overwhelming sense of gratitude that I get to do the kind of work that I do. I mean, it's been a very powerful sensibility. I've been very much changed by listening to my respondents in that way. But go on with your question.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think those of us for whom faith is central, we're trying ways to sneak studying the faith of others. I was able to sneak in worldview into my dissertation on genetics problem solving. Yet, we're finding so much. This DEI it's a very good avenue in order to let people speak about their faith. And it's just amazing because everybody's afraid. Everybody feels unsafe. And so we need methods to kind of extricate, what it is. Is it your faith? Is it your politics? Is it your religion? And I guess I'd like to ask for some good advice for you, because in the academy, nothing counts unless it's published. So my two questions, are, about your funding, how your research is funded, and number two, just about the journals that are open to studies such as yours, or from other fields.
Yeah. So my particular standpoint is as a sociologist of religion. So sociologists study group behaviors, and think that groups, take as an axiom in our discipline that groups are more and a kind of conscious actor in society that's more than just the sum of the people in them, and that groups have a very large impact on how individuals express themselves, group and group identities. So that's like what sociology is. I have found that in general, academics are a little bit suspicious of the study of religion, but have been very warm to the social scientific work I've done on religion. So I publish in the same kind of journals that other sociologists publish in, like the Annual Review of Sociology, the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. I published my academic books with Oxford University Press. And so there have been lots of opportunities. So I think if framed in the right way, that this kind of work does have lots of opportunities, and it overlaps with inequality studies broadly. I've done quite a bit of work on the overlap between race and religious inequality, and I've done some other work on the scientific environment and inequality in science, in particular how people who have families compare to those who do not have children, rather, in scientific work. So I've not had really a problem publishing that work, but I would say there's the occasional suspicion within the academy about research on religion, just to begin with. But by and large, I think my work is pretty well received.
All right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, when you said, we have to be wise also about framing, and if our faith doesn't help us frame real world questions, then maybe we're not thinking deeply enough. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think my faith so much has an impact on, it has an impact on how I do things methodologically, in that I have a great commitment to excellence and methodological rigor, and I think that's very much a value from my faith. I would say my faith influences my work substantively, probably by the kind of research questions I choose. I think because of my experience in particular kinds of faith communities, I maybe have a more native interest in certain kinds of questions, and so I think, frankly, that's why we need a diversity of people in the academy, because we all have social experiences which point us in a particular direction, and we need all of those social experiences in the way in which they positively influence research in order to get the most truthful picture of society.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Eli. Thanks for your talk today.
Thank you.
I'm doing my PhD in chemistry here, and I'm actually part of the fellows program as well in the third year. And so, as it was kind of mentioned earlier, this is about, I guess, this book, and where we're actually in our curriculum using the Working for Better book.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a huge compliment.
So yeah, it's a very good read right now. And so I guess I was thinking more from that framework, but I think I can still list my question here, where tonight you're talking about the discrimination of the different kind of religious practices. I'm wondering, is there because in Working for Better, you're mentioning like kind of systemic discrimination. Is that mentioned here in like this book as well? Can
It
you
is, yeah.
elaborate, and then maybe and then I think I'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, so what Eli's talking about is that I say in this Working for Better book that Christians on the whole have been very concerned about individual responsibility, in particular ethical responsibility, as a way of bringing their faith to work, but that our research finds that they haven't thought very much about whole systems being purveyors of bad things, and how Christians, but really I think this would apply to other religious groups as well, might use their ethical and moral frameworks to change systems and ways of doing things and cultures. We don't tend to have as much imagination for that. And I think that's partly an American thing, because the way in which our individualism as a cultural value means that we tend to kind of narrow in our particular world and not think so much about how we sit within broader social systems. So I think that's what you were referring to. Yeah.
Yes, and then so like with that noted, then because then you go and elaborate like different ways as individuals where we can help like affect change in that system, which is unique in a sense where it's like now as individuals within a system like trying to change something that is functioning as an entity.
That's right.
Where I'm wondering then if there's any way, or if it's ever viewed in a sense that systematic discrimination can almost be viewed with individual aspects, where there are individuals within the system who enact that discrimination as seen as part of this system. And maybe if there's a way to maybe break that
so
down to
another
people.
way to say what I think you're trying to get at, Eli, is that certain kinds of individuals have more power in systems to keep those systems going or to disrupt those systems than other individuals, right? So you might think of, in the system called a society, those who have more money have somewhat more power in the society than those who have less. Power meaning, you know, how much agency you have to make happen what you want to happen, right? So if I own a private jet and I want to go on vacation to Hawaii, I have more power to make that happen than I do if I need to buy a plane ticket like the average person does, right? So just as a very obvious example. So what I argue in the book is that sometimes we have more agency to change systems than we think. So that's one of the things we argue. Another thing that we argue is sometimes we need to put ourselves on the line and call out what's happening in a system to make change. So thinking to myself, gosh, I wish this bad thing would stop happening. I wish in my organization they wouldn't discriminate against women as much, say if I'm a man in the system. Speaking about it to one's boss is another kind of thing, right? That's starting to address some power in the system, and that might be costly. And so we need to think about when it's wise to go ahead and address a system, even though it might be personally costly, and other kinds of ways of working within systems as well.
Okay, interesting. So I guess pointedly then, like, why is the discrimination of that person seen as systematic, even though it's an individual action?
Because it affects a set of individuals in a similar way.
Okay. Thank you.
And to say more than that, I would have to go into a lecture. But thank you. That was a very nuanced question. Yeah.
Hello, my name's John Magnuson, and I
John.
appreciate you being here and your
Thank
thoughtful
you.
approach to this. I have a twofold question. One is kind of in the understanding of the research. My work with different kinds of companies, I find that when I'm working with a 3M and what happens in that workplace is very different when I'm working with a 2 or 3 person workplace. And
Right.
did you find, or was the research done in one or the other, and did you find any major difference in the size of the entity?
I would love to have you come back tomorrow when we're doing some more speaking, and my colleague Denise Daniels is here, and she's worked in an MBA program and also now works as a professor of entrepreneurship. but as a sociologist, I'll try to do my best. So we did look at all different kinds of workplaces. And so one of the questions we asked is about the size of the workplace and also the goals of the workplace, whether it was a profit-motivated or a non-profit place. So we asked all kinds of characteristics about workplaces, how well people knew others in their workplaces, in their division, in their company, whether they felt they had access to their boss, all of these kinds of things.
And then the follow-up to that, I had worked with a U.S. congressman, and so how we frame issues can make a big difference on how the dialogue comes about. In your understanding of these issues from the research, are you seeing any way in which a workplace can prepare its workers so that they can bring forth ideas in a workplace without it becoming what you were describing of that problematic of evangelizing and other things?
Yeah. So two kinds of principles that Denise and Chris, I have two co-authors on this Religion and Changing Workplace that I want to acknowledge, talked about. One is using public data to understand your workplace, to understand what's likely to be happening in your workplace. And I think you can do this pretty powerfully, especially if you work with a big company, that has a large number of workers. So the region where you work in the industry, there's probably publicly available data on the religiosity and other kinds of diversity markers in that region of the country, and you will know as part of a leadership team whether people are likely to come from like a local workforce or whether they come from a more international workforce, and then there's other kinds of things you can do. So I would say do as much as you can on demographically understanding your workplace before you do anything internal to the workplace. That's just smart, sort of understanding who your workers are in a way that is publicly available. And then there's a lot of wisdom. Denise has done a lot of consulting on this. There's a lot of wisdom after that in terms of the steps, wisdom needed in terms of the steps you take internal to the workplace. So as a leadership team, probably how much power you have over individual workers. And in some ways, when you have more power, you can ask less personal questions about people, right? Because you could use that very negatively in ways that they don't know whether you're going to use it negatively or not. If you are in a more equal relationship, then you can have more personal kinds of dialogue about things. So judging the levels of relationship and the power structures, and then providing ways for people to give anonymous and confidential feedback on particular kinds of things that you want to change in ways that is truly anonymous or truly confidential. And you'll have to be the judge of whether or not you could carry that off. But those are three kinds of ways that you can start getting information about what might work in your particular workplace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ecklund.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm interested to hear, in the times that people did report conflicts in the workplace, what were the topics of the conflict and what were the conditions that sort of cultivated those conflicts?
That's a good question. I don't think, unfortunately, that we have the kind of data that we could use to talk about all conflict in all types of workplaces. But the conditions under which religious conflict becomes salient, we can talk some about that with these data. And it is in workplace environments where people have like a low relational base. So they don't know very much about each other. They don't have very good relationships. And then inserting religion, which is like another potential source of difference, can then make things kind of conflictual, right? Although what we found too was that subverting religion rather than inserting it could be just as bad. So subverting it completely or inserting it in a kind of non-relationally grounded way could both have very negative kinds of impact and lead to conflict within workplaces. Because if you subvert, if you just say, we don't talk about things personal here, we especially don't talk about religion here, then people for whom religion is what we call a master identity that really directs other things that they do in their lives, feel like, gosh, like no one knows me here. Like they don't know what, when they want to hold this meeting on, Friday night or Saturday or Sunday or whenever the holy time is for a particular tradition, I don't feel like I can say, like, I can't be part of that. I just have to, make other arrangements or not show up and make it seem like I'm not committed. And it's just sort of like constant mental gymnastics. And then inserting it, just brutally inserting religion into the relationship is like, whoa, where did that come from? Like, I didn't know that part of you. Like, let's just ease in, So there's both can be very difficult. And I think we probably have been more afraid of inserting in unthinking ways and less afraid of subverting. But I think we also ought to be just as concerned potentially about subverting too. That also has a lot of negative consequences.
I'm curious about religious identity and discrimination compared to more visible forms of identity, such as like race or gender, and how people handle microaggressions. So kind of negative comments, not knowing who might be in the room when that's not a visible characteristic, and how that affects the concealment that you were talking about, and the self-censorship, or is that actually fairly similar to, let's say, a Black person self-censoring their experience of their race, even though they can't self-censor their identity marker, but is there a difference in a more visible form of identity?
That's a great question. Wow, I'm really like the other question. I need to like stop myself from like now launching into a lecture because this is something about which many books have been written. So just a couple of things. I think we need to challenge a little bit the idea that religion is not visible. So many of the types of people who say that they're being religiously discriminated against wear religious symbols, have as a part of their religious tradition that they need to do things that are going to be fairly visible to others. And the way in which those who do more of that kind of expression are also more likely to feel discriminated against, right? So there is a visibility about religion. We found, and I was actually not expecting to find this, we found that religion-based microaggressions are quite common, and they often are like veiled as certain kinds of social sanctions, like, oh, this person is not very fun because they like don't drink and they won't go out with us, and the person has as a part of their religious tradition that they don't drink. And so then they feel as if those kinds of comments about not being fun and not being part of the group are a type of microaggression that really their religious tradition is being sanctioned, because often the aggressor will couch it within the religious, oh, they go to church, or oh, they are Muslim and they're going to spend time, they would of course need to pray, and so they wouldn't have time to party with us. Like that was something that was actually said to one of my respondents. So and those kind of things, like the respondent is supposed to just kind of, it's said in like this joking way, but so then the respondent doesn't feel like they can, or the person who's being a respondent for my study, but person who's experiencing it doesn't feel like they can say anything because of the sort of jocular way that the aggression is presented. And so there's a very complex kind of thing going on here, but in my studies of race, this goes on also. So I was surprised by the similarities among these categories, especially gender, race, and religion. There's a way in which there is a kind of overtness about these categories, but then there's more often a kind of subversive kind of discrimination, which we also call microaggression, that goes on. we think of microaggressions as like, you're not stabbing someone, but we call it death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? You're just getting cut just little ways all the time until it adds up in totally marginalizing the person. Yeah.
In your opening, you mentioned that people want to express their faith at work.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any expressions of faith at work that you found in your research that actually enhanced workplace culture? If so, what might they be?
Yeah, so to study whether or not something enhanced workplace culture, you'd have to go in and talk to workplace leaders and other workers in the organization. So I'm not sure that we would be able to sort of say definitively what people perceived as enhancing workplace culture. What we measured was more things like how much you like your job, how much you liked other people at your job, whether you plan to stay at the job long term, whether you felt committed to the job, whether you would stay there if you didn't get raises. Like, we asked all these kinds of things about like worker satisfaction with their jobs. We asked leaders slightly different kinds of questions, but those would be our proxies for religious expression having an impact on those kind of things, which other studies find are very much related to workplace culture. So if you have a bunch of people who like their job, who want to go there every day, who will stay there long term, then that tends to also be linked to a very positive workplace culture.
All right, last question.
Yep. Yeah, I'm Todd, and I worked in Silicon Valley on automated test equipment, so people wouldn't have to be robots. Anyways, there was a company I worked for that had a Bible study at lunchtime because the owner of the company was Integrated Silicon Solutions Incorporated. And the owner was a Christian, so what he had decided to do was have a Bible study at the lunch break. So my question is it always necessary, if it's true that our work can be our worship, our work ethic, and it can be, people see it, is it really necessary to talk about religion I've always worked on the clock, so it's kind of like, I would say on the clock. I worked one salaried job, but when you're on the clock, is it always necessary to talk about religion, or would your work, do you feel that maybe your work would be showing, I mean, they already know, they always know I'm a Christian, I'm no fun, so.
Yeah, I think that's up to you. And I don't mean that in any kind of dismissive way. So how one expresses their religion at work will probably depend in part on the demands of the religion, right? And the demands of the workplace, like what's an appropriate expression of faith at work. I interviewed, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a Jewish woman who's a doctor who practiced the Sabbath very rigorously. And she tried very much to get off from work always on the Sabbath, right? Like, she told people and tried to get off from work, but she just did a high-level medical, I can't remember what right now, but let's just say she was a neurosurgeon or something that we would think of as a very high-level surgical job. And she said, but if I have someone, who's one of my patients who's in an emergent situation and I need to operate, I'm not going to say, well, you gave me the Sabbath off, and so now I'm just going to set this down and go home now and practice the Sabbath. So there's a way in which, and other people might make other kinds of decisions. I'm just giving that as one type of example. So there's this demands of the religion, demands of the job, and then something else which I'll say, which is, who you are as a person, right? We have all different kinds of personalities, and bringing my whole self to work including my religious self, might mean something very different for me because of the way I'm wired. Then it might seem like a violation of my personality to not share about this faith tradition. and to others are just sort of quieter about all aspects of their lives, and other types of personalities might not feel like they need to share so overtly. So I think those kinds of factors we're going to need to take into consideration. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It is fascinating research, fascinating data sets, fascinating patterns that you find in there. I can imagine as a data junkie, like you're just geeking out a little bit about all those kind of things. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing some of the interpretation as well of these results. Like having the results is one thing, interpreting the results is another thing. And so we're very thankful for your help in helping to interpret these results, and then sharing that with us and encouraging us as Christians in the workplace as well. It's so important in this changing religious landscape that we live in. So thank you. We can continue the conversation outside in a couple of minutes. We'll be right out there in the foyer. Also, if you're interested, we can continue the conversation tomorrow morning. And so you're welcome to join us at Ansem House for a conversation about this book, which is kind of an extension of like your earlier book and the book that you talked about tonight. So you're welcome to, if you have any questions, if you want to know about where it is and how to get there, talk with someone at the table. We can tell you more about that. When you go out, we'd love for you to leave your surveys, filled out surveys, with one of the Ansem House folks here in the room. That'd be amazing. Again, that helps us to kind of think deeper about how can we make these lectures even better for in the future. So, and then as the last thing, I would like to call up my colleague Lauren, Director of Development, right here to close out the evening.
Thank you all for giving us your evening. We are so blessed that you're spending this time with us to learn from Dr. Elaine Howard Ecklund. I'm just up here to thank you, to highlight some of the amazing events that we have coming up, more information on our website. We would truly love to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. at Ansem House at Melrose Station. But I'm also up here to give away a couple of books and copies of Working for Better. So let's see who's the winners here. Alrighty, our first winner is Rich Frieder. Oh, yeah, Rich. Nathan Swanson. Okay, Nathan. And David Woolers. Whoa, okay. It must have been rigged. I gotta check my data on that. Some bad. Anyways. But also, just these events are made possible by the generosity of a lot of our partners. And so we're so grateful for you if you have contributed to the work of Ansem House. And if it's something that you're interested in doing, I would love to speak to you after, or we can grab coffee, or feel free to check out our website as well. But I just want to wish you all a happy evening. Go in peace. Please join us for some lemonade and cookies in the reception. Thank you.